Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. My name is Yogesh Chavda, founder of Y2S Consulting, and also the co-founder of YogiAI.com, which I just launched last week. So if you haven't checked it out yet, go to www.theyogiai.com. You'll be able to find my tool there, which is designed to help brand folks develop ideas to brand concepts. But today we're not talking about Yogi AI. Today we're talking with Matt Seitz, and he is an amazing guy. I met last year at a conference. He was part of a panel on synthetic data, but more importantly, he's got such a broad set of experiences. In the back of my mind, I knew I needed to have him come on my podcast at some point. So today is it. So Matt, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Yogesh. It's a pleasure to be here. A pleasure to see you again, and the feeling is mutual. It's been great getting to know you, and I'm excited for Yogi AI as well. I'm excited to see how adoption goes and really making an impact.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you so much for that. So before we go too far down the pike, I always start my show by asking, this question, which is tell us about who you are and what got you to where you are today. Because you've got your journey and you've got your trajectory. I'm so curious to hear that first.
Happy to share. So today I lead something called the AI Hub for Business at the University of Wisconsin. But I took a winding road to get here, which I'm glad you asked. So I've been in tech actually for 30 years. So I started as a programmer. I spent a bunch of time in analytics. And then my last 14 years, I was at Google, and it was remarkable. I ran, at the end, I led the search business for US retail. And every customer I met with, as big as Walmart, as small as Tractor Supply or Party City, AI was the entire conversation. And so, the chance to work full time on AI at the school, I think is really exciting, and work with students, with researchers, with industry leaders is really a neat and a privilege. And then I think, AI is changing so quickly that a chance to be at that moment with those stakeholders is really a unique moment.
Amazing, amazing. So you actually held an event a few weeks ago called Ground Truth, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Right. So tell us what that is, and tell us what you accomplished in that.
Yeah. So the goal of the summit, we call the Ground Truth AI for Business, and there's tons of noise in AI.
Matt, your sound changed a little bit.
No.
Now you're good. You're good now.
Is it okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So there's a ton of news hype around AI right now, and a lot of the events I think are based on where's the technology going? What's the future of? On my screen now, Yogesh. What's the future of technology? What's the future of the world? We really wanted to focus on business, right? What is specifically actionable for business leaders? What can they do tomorrow to take action on that has actual impact on the business? And then how should they be thinking about the next 3 to 5 years for their companies? That was our focus. We think, at the university in Wisconsin, we're really, sort of sleeves up getting things done. We care about the technology and we love the excitement, but our focus again was what does it mean to people today?
Amazing, amazing. And what was the reception that you got from the conversations that you witnessed?
It was really a buzz, Yogesh. I think the blend of researcher, we had students in the room and industry leaders. I think that created real energy and dynamic that I haven't seen at other conferences.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing that's real is the pace is so fast that even just the hallway conversations, people were comparing notes and hey, what are you doing? What am I doing?
Yeah.
In a way that you don't see without that number of folks in the same location.
And how are the students feeling? Because they're obviously looking at all of this stuff happening. They're obviously seeing the news about entry level jobs are disappearing, which I'm sure is raising anxiety amongst them as well. But after having being part of this conference where they're seeing how industry leaders are talking about it, did that give them more anxiety or did it give them more excitement? Where did they typically land?
Yeah. So, there is a lot of anxiety with students right now.
Yeah, no question. Yeah.
And I think is with out of everyone I talk to, I think I get the most from students.
Yeah.
Just my daughter, she's graduating this year from UW.
Yeah.
She started before ChatGPT launched.
Right.
And everything was predictable. You knew how it was going to play out, and then all of a sudden their world's been upended. What's going to happen to my job, my career,
Yeah.
the world I merge into?
Yeah.
I think the positive is the students we had at the summit. The best thing you can do with any anxiety, this, is to take action on it, do something about it, educate yourself. And so those students, I think, are the ones who leaned in.
Yeah.
And really, hey, what does this mean to me? And so I thought much more optimism in the room, which is a positive signal, because there's a lot of anxiety. Absolutely.
Amazing. No, I do recognize that. And I've got a kid who's just finishing up his freshman year this week, in fact, in college. And he and I have had multiple conversations about how does AI affect him, and what does that mean for him, and what choices does he make right now, and so on and so forth. And I don't think there's a way you can get around it. Basically, you have to address it. Basically, so.
And the advice, when you and I were kids, and even 4 years ago, the advice was go to college, get a degree, work hard, you'll be great. We don't know the answer right now. We don't know what it looks like in 5-10 years. And that uncertainty is super uncomfortable.
It is uncomfortable, but at the same time, right, if I take a step back and think about it, it's such an amazing opportunity, because it doesn't matter how many gray hairs like you and I have, right? Our kids are going to be able to actually shape the future if they apply their energy, their critical thinking and problem solving, their creative energies against it. They can come up with things and innovate with things that we would have never thought about, quite frankly speaking, right?
I often say that I compare AI. I think Industrial Revolution, the printing press, I think are two of the closer comps.
Yep.
With the one difference being those took decades to unfold.
Yeah.
Whereas AI is unfolding in months, years, but in many cases months.
Yeah.
And so the disruption is real, and the people who can lean into that and find what's being created, there's as much opportunity as ever. Absolutely.
Agree. Now, we talk about the students. Let's talk about the industry partners that were there, just very briefly. I'm sure a lot of them were experimenting already with the AI. Some of them may be thinking about scaling things with AI. Where was the energy in the room this time around? Because I felt like last year it was all about experimentation. This year I would be thinking it's more about operationalization and scalability and things like that. Is that what you were seeing, or was it still in the experimentation piloting phase?
I still see, so yes and yes, Yogesh, right? I mean, I'll talk to a company is leaning in across the board, and then I'll talk to a company who's still early.
Yeah.
But I would say I talk to very few companies who aren't taking AI seriously right now. People believe it's dead serious, and they're sleeves up. How do I want to take action? Okay. That is for sure. And I think the two things that I'm seeing a lot of right now, to your point, one is I don't know how to budget for this. Right. So, listen, I gave all my engineers Claude Code, and the budget I set is we blew it in 3 months.
Yeah.
Right. And so now what do I do with that? Right. That's a question that's new. Another one is there's very few cases where AI is replacing a human, right? What it's very often doing is, it's replacing 70% of a human's job, right? And so I have all these people that are 70 or 80% loaded now. And so does that mean I can do more work, right? Or does that mean I need to maybe cut some headcount? Or does that mean I need a reorganization? And so those are some of the second order questions that people are starting to see. And that's what so those are the kind of things leaders are trying to wrestle with. Okay, now that I'm getting momentum, what are the next decisions I got to make?
Amazing. So on the first one about them blowing through their budgets, I'm guessing this is because of token usage, is what I would imagine.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. And I don't.
And what's interesting is, Yogesh, is people the first place you go with a new tech is how can I be more efficient, right? So I can take cost out of the business.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's great. I can use an agent to approve purchase orders or, automate customer service. And that is a value proposition. But now the finance team is saying, okay, how does that trade off on the token cost for deploying those agents? And what is the ROI? Unlike a traditional system that I implement and then the cost ongoing is very low.
Yeah.
And so that's a new vector that I think people are coming to grips with.
Yeah, and I don't think there's any best practices yet because there is no practice at this point in time, right? So I wonder if there is an opportunity. I'm saying this out loud. Maybe from a research perspective or from a industry perspective, to say we need to put some parameters around this and guardrails around this. I would imagine.
Exactly right. Yeah, I mean, two things that came out in conversation. One is, do I really need Opus 4.6 for a customer service chatbot, or can I get by with Sonnet, right, and pay 5% of the token cost?
Yeah.
And then another one a theme that started to emerge is, if I'm using AI for growth, it's a lot easier to digest the cost, right? Because it's, I'm getting sustained growth, right? And so I can see that much more clearly.
Yeah.
When I'm taking cost out, now I'm got to sharpen my pencil and say, okay, what's the extra cost I'm incurring versus, versus the cost I can actually take out with headcount or otherwise. And so that was the second thing that emerged is it's easier to make the numbers square when it's a growth story.
Yeah. No, I get that because I use Claude a lot right now, and I've fallen in love with Claude in the last couple of months, to be honest with you. Like they've really step changed in terms of what they do. I literally had to deal with it this week where I maxed out, right? And it says you have to wait until May 1st for you to use it again. And I was like, I can't wait until May 1st. I have to go buy it, and it gives you the options. And I literally sat for like 30 minutes thinking about, do I buy $50 or do I buy $100? I don't know how much I'll use over a 4-day period. I had no idea how to think about that, right? And I'm like, wait a minute, like when did this become a thing actually? So it's starting to create a new behavioral set in terms of AI usage in my mind, in terms of how many prompts am I putting in, how sophisticated are the prompts, how much work is happening in the background, all my connectors that are on, or should I put them all off because this particular conversation doesn't require it, right? I'm starting to do that mental gymnastics in my head around how do I optimize my usage of AI in this case. That wasn't the case for the first 2.5 years, so it's interesting to see how they're adapting, and it's how it's forcing me to adapt as a consequence of that, so.
And the key being, think about it at scale, right? So each of us as individuals, it's like, okay, yes, let me make that cost. So now how do I think about, I have a department of 1,000 people.
Yeah.
Who gets the $200 plan? Who gets the $20 plan? Who gets what token budgets? What's the ROI on all those? And under all of that, what's my competitor doing? So if I get conservative, are they going to beat me to the punch on something, right? Or am I throwing tokens or throwing money away on tokens? So really some just new decisions that, we're not used to making.
We're not used to making it all. And it just goes to show you that new metrics will start coming into dashboards, new KPIs to track, right? Because there's no way today to track how many prompts you've put into a thread, how many threads do you have going on at the same time, right? In some cases, and which ones are more expensive versus less expensive. All that kind of calculations is going to be very different, but I think we'll learn more as the year progresses on this front. But I also want to come to the other comment that you made around decision-making, around organization, headcount and structure and things like that. Was there conversation around agentic workflows by any chance? Is that something that's starting to percolate into industry now, or what did you hear?
Absolutely, Yogesh, right? So, it's having an AI who can suggest, right? AI can suggest I change contract language or suggest some ideas that I might use in a marketing campaign. That's super valuable.
Yeah.
But now I can have AI do I have a recruiting team of 100 people, and I kind of AI do some of those interviews or resume screens, right? Or I have a purchasing team of 1,000 people, and I kind of AI take pieces out of that process. All of those places, agentic changes workflows in a way that is 10x, right, what it is for generative. And I think that's the harder thing for leaders to think about, because what you get into is, okay, this agent can do this step in a workflow, and it's maybe getting it right 90% of the time, right? Okay, so is that good enough, right? Is 90% good enough that I can hand over that workflow, or is it not, or I have to do it with a human monitor, right? So there's a whole set of decisions that we didn't have to make before.
Yeah. Well, look, at the top of the call, I said, I launched Yogi AI. It's an agentic workflow at the end of the day, right? And I don't talk about it on the website, in that degree of detail. But if you were to peek behind the curtain, think about, even when you were at Google, I'm sure when you were launching new features on the system, right, there was a process of, ideation to, well, there are 3 different ways you can design this. What's the process? What's the one that's going to give you the maximum value for it? You go through that process at the end of the day, right? The CPG companies do it all the time as well. This workflow I built takes you from idea to concept, and it gives you 3 different conceptual directions. But think about all the steps that you have to go through to get to that concept in the first place. What's the brand? Is this going to help me grow my brand positioning or not? Who's the audience? How will the audience, what kind of tensions is that audience feeling? And is this concept going to be able to overcome that from a benefit or a feature perspective? What's the credibility factor against it? Is this going to be on trend or off trend? All those questions that are there, I've built into my system to be able to diagnose based on a very few inputs. And if you think about it in the traditional sense, that was work that people would be doing over a period of days or weeks or months. And I've incorporated all of that into my system, basically. So by the time you put in the inputs and you get your outputs, that entire workflow is working behind the scenes and is fully automated. Right?
So how did you decide, Yogi, how did you decide which parts you could fully hand over to an agent versus which parts need some human, right? An agent can do, but you need human inputs, right? Or some human guidance or review. And then which parts you say, no, I'm keeping out of Yogi AI because I'm gonna, this just has to be human only. How did you go through that process?
Yeah, so great question, right? So if again, the first thing I always say to people, and I'm not trying to short sell my own tool, but I'm not trying to boil the ocean, number one.
Yeah.
Right. Number 2, I will never have anybody put all the information into the inputs to give them a final complete set of outputs where they say, yep, this is done. I can now go and do my next phase of work, right? So based on the inputs they're putting in, the workflow itself is going to capture, say, 75 to 85% of the output, right? And when you get the output, you as a human still has to look at it and say, is this good enough for me to progress to the next step? Or do I want to either iterate again because you made me think about something that I had not thought about? Give me that feedback that it helped me, it gave me clarity, right? Or the other situation is that, okay, I see this, but I now need some more validation from my customer base, whether it's consumers or customers or whatever. Let me go get some input from that, right? So that's kind of like how I built the system out. I'm not even touching like legal review or PR product review into that because A, it's not my expertise. I don't know how that works. Number 2, even if I build that in, is it accurate or not? I have no way of evaluating, right? So I said, I'll keep all those things out, let the user get the concept, and then they can go and do those rounds with their colleagues inside the company and get their respective feedback because they're the experts. I'm not. So I put a system that stays true to what I know. And I'm not kind of getting outside of my area of expertise, so to speak, if that answers your question.
Yeah.
Right.
And how I guess you're early. You launched last week?
Last week, yep.
Okay.
Official ones.
What have you learned in week one? Have you
Lots of interest for sure. Lots of people coming back surprising, boy, this has really helped me think things through, which has been fantastic. The way I've set it up, I'm hoping that people see the value in it and they're willing to buy not just one but multiple licenses within their organizations, which is obviously what I would like. So I'm now in that phase of trying to get people to do a demo and kind of like see if they're liking it, and if that's the case, then are they willing to go to the next phase, basically. So, but that's just from an agentic perspective. But the reason why I brought that up is that there's going to be conversations happening around org design, in my opinion. Right. And I'm just curious if you heard that in your conference as well or not, around org design.
That's right. Yeah, one of our speakers on the final day, he talked about this, and I mentioned the 70%, right? Which is how, and he would use a thresholding method, right? Which is, I think, I don't remember the exact number, but he'd say, if I got to this amount of disruption, I can no longer just say, hey, I'm just gonna reduce the headcount by X%, right? If I get to say it's 70%, now I need to actually open up the hood and say, how am I going to do a redesign of the org? I think that's one handle on it. The other one that I think I teach this in my classes is bottlenecks. I think are critical, right? So, what are the bottlenecks in my process, right? And there's two. One is a cost bottleneck, and the other is a growth bottleneck, right? So if it's if I'm Domino's Pizza, right, a bottleneck in having a customer order drives growth, right? A bottleneck in getting a pizza out might be, driving customer satisfaction, or delivery time might even be cost, right? So, how do I make sure that I'm cutting in places that I can, but I'm actually not cutting or even increasing usage or using more leverage in the places where the bottlenecks remain, right? Because that's where I want to win, right? And so that was, I think, the second nuance is there's places you cut some fat out, and there's places where you might even want to add, because that's where you can increase your advantage.
Amazing. Okay, so my friend, there's something you told me just before we jumped on the call about agentic commerce, and I want to dedicate time on this particular topic, right? So you coming from Google, having worked on the retail side of the business, right? You have a lot of experience in this space. So why don't we first start the conversation by saying, me asking you, what is your definition for agentic commerce? And where do you see it potentially working, and where do you see it potentially not working at all? Let's start with that part first.
So I told you as we were starting, I'm a skeptic of the grand visions of agentic commerce, and so I think I feel like it's almost like it's this hallucination that we all have that you're just going to go into ChatGPT and say, hey, I need a TV. And it'll give you 3 options based on what it knows about you, and just say, I want the middle one, and then you'll purchase it, and 2 days later it'll show up at your house. And I think there's just a whole bunch of breakpoints in that people who don't know retail just are assuming away. But when you start to think through, breakdown, right? And we've seen this in retail. Every few years, the latest technology is gonna change. It was QR codes, social commerce, right? Endless aisle, virtual checkout, all these things. Like, oh my God, retail is going to be changed forever. So I'll say 2 things. I do think agentic commerce, there are pieces where AI is going to be a huge impact in retail. But I think that grand vision has there's a lot of barriers, and I'm sure we'll get into these, Yogesh, but a lot of barriers for really getting there.
So I love the fact that we're having this conversation, first and foremost, because this is an area that I'm talking about publicly as well. I have a keynote coming up actually on May 14th in Puerto Rico on this topic, so I better know what I'm talking about, right? But more importantly, you said that there are some places where AI can help. So let's start with that question. Where do you see AI actually helping first? And then we can talk about the grand vision and where you see all the breakpoints.
Well, listen, absolutely upfront in discovery and research, AI is already showing value, which is, hey,
Okay.
I need a new pair of running shoes, or I need a new television, and here's some things. Like, tell me what models or
Hmm.
pieces might, would best fit what I'm asking about. I
Yeah.
think we're seeing a ton of value there, especially, by the way, in the long tail, right? So I need I need a custom part replacement, right?
Yeah.
Does this part, will it actually work? Or I
Hmm.
need a really fine-tuned feature that maybe isn't even available in major retail.
Yeah.
It's only available, let's say, from a Shopify merchant. I
Hmm.
think we're seeing a lot of value there.
Okay.
I think where it breaks down is once I get past that discovery to actually wanting to start to do what we call active consideration.
Yeah.
That's where I think, and then actual transacting, I think that's where we're going to see much more of a barrier.
Yeah, and I think the results are already starting to come in, right? OpenAI did a pilot with Walmart.
That's right.
They announced it in October. It seems like
That's right.
they came back with their pilot results saying that the conversion rate wasn't as high as they thought it would
That's
be,
right. That's
right?
right.
So Walmart kind of like took a step back from OpenAI, it seems like, and they kept it at the discovery phase only,
That's right.
not the
That's right.
transaction phase, right?
That's right.
And quite frankly, even if you think about other services that you can technically connect in through OpenAI and purchase. I use OpenAI as an example. I'm not saying that it's an OpenAI only issue. It's everyone right now. Um, is that the experience of buying is still not that great,
That's right.
right? So is your skepticism around the transaction part only, or is it also about other parts from consideration to? Is it only between consideration and purchase, or is it something else beyond that as well?
Um, well, so I think what I think is interesting is you think about the players in the
Yeah,
market,
yeah.
right? So like if we think about OpenAI, um, Walmart, to that example, has spent 25 years building Walmart.com to be the incredibly tailored, tuned shopping experience for a
Hmm.
shopper.
Yeah,
Amazon's done the same. Dick's Sporting is like all the major retailers.
yeah.
Does OpenAI want to make the investments needed to make ChatGPT have that level of experience where, let's say I'm shopping for that TV, I can look at all the different colors, right? And I can read all the reviews, right? And I can do side by side comparisons to all the different options. That's the large capital investment. If I'm OpenAI, do I want to make that investment, or do I want to start selling ads, right? And say, hey, click on the ad and I'll send you traffic over to Walmart and you pay me for that, right? And so I think the incentives, hard. I'm not sure the incentives are actually for OpenAI to try to disrupt the retailer. Then you think about the retailer side. Which retailer wants to be disintermediated by a chatbot, right?
Hmm.
So at Google 10 years ago, we launched Shopping Express, and we tried to do the same thing. We said, hey, you can transact directly on Google Shopping and never go see the retailer. And retailers hated it. They did not want anything to do with it because they wanted the customer on their website so that they could recommend products, recommend upsells. They could get the customer browsing data. And now retail media is a massive source of revenue, right? That's potentially at risk if that transaction
Hmm.
doesn't happen on their prem.
Yeah.
And then compounding all that, just let's assume you're Dick's Sporting Goods, right? Or Kohl's, right? If I do all my agentic shopping and I decide to buy a pair of tennis shoes,
Hmm.
my agents at the end of that is going to go find the lowest price,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And so if I'm Dick's Sporting Goods, am I going to get those sales, or are they going to go to Walmart, right? Or Amazon, right? So if anyone wants agentic shopping to win, it's probably Walmart and Amazon because they have the best, pricing, right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
cost and delivery. Everybody else, it potentially destroys their business, right? So I think the incentives for both the AI companies and the retailers, I don't know that they're in favor of truly delivering that experience.
I hear you, on that part, especially if you're doing it through like OpenAI. But even Google's launched their end-to-end solution as well. They announced it at the National Retail Federation, NRF,
That's right.
whatever it's called, right?
That's right.
So what are they then doing compared to what OpenAI is doing? Because they seem to be taking you from discovery all the way through to transaction now, correct?
That's right.
So based on what you just talked about Google Shopping, is how different is this now than what was done previously?
I think it's absolutely analogous to Google Shopping, right? Right. I think it's the next, or Google Express, right? Which is, hey,
Yeah.
I'm going to be that platform where it can happen.
Mhm.
And I think there are cases where you will see it work, right? So I talked about the long tail, right? I think you'll see this work in B2B buying, right?
Yeah.
Which is where I have a set of things I buy and repeat. I can be very specific on what I want. There's
Yeah.
less preference, right?
Yeah.
But I think you're going to struggle to see personal retail. And by the way, the greatest example of this is Amazon, right? So, I mean, do you have Amazon Prime?
I do. Yeah.
Yeah. So Amazon is not opting into this, right? And so if you go on Google and search for a product, right? Google Shopping doesn't have Amazon. So every shopper who goes and does their research on Google knows that, okay, now at some point I have to pull out of this and go to Amazon.com and see what Amazon offers,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so all this breaks down if Amazon doesn't opt in, right?
But what they have done, though, what Amazon has done is they've launched their own version called Rufus.
That's right.
Right, which is supposed
That's
to be
exactly right.
the proxy for what
That's right.
Google and what OpenAI are offering.
That's right.
I got the benefit last week of seeing
That's right.
a presentation from Amazon about the Rufus
That's right.
app development,
That's right.
and they're keeping everything within their walled garden, so to speak.
That's right. So this is what we're seeing. So Amazon has Rufus, Walmart has Sparky.
Yeah.
Okay? And so they're going to try to get you an on-prem, right? Amazon made 68 billion in retail media revenue last year.
Holy
right?
cow.
Like they are going to want you on Amazon, and 35% of their sales come from purchase recommendations, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they want you on-prem and Amazon.com, right? As does Walmart with Sparky. They want you in their store, right? So I think we're going to see this propagation of the walled gardens, right? Which is, I want you in my home. And then Google, exactly, they're a horizontal company, right? So Google would prefer a world where this is all agentic and you get it through Gemini and Google Search. And I think we'll probably see an amplified model, right? Where there's some of this is even more, the discovery and research is even more powered with AI, but still then you end up in a walled garden.
Amazing. So in a way, you're actually kind of like pointing out a few signals here, which I think are really interesting. On one side, discovery, everybody agrees that general models can help a lot with, right?
Yeah.
Transaction, people want to keep it the way things are. And there are two things, by the way, that we haven't touched on yet. You talked about brands, you talked about retailers and the platforms, right? Well, even the brands are trying to figure out what to go do. Let's put it that, they don't know how to navigate this. But from a consumer perspective, when you talked about recommendations from ChatGPT based on ads, I don't think the consumer wants that. They want it to be completely unadulterated. Tell me the cleanest recommendation. At least that's how consumers are currently trusting it. And, I wonder if, these platforms start actually putting in ads, will that lead to a reduction in trust on the quality of the recommendation, basically?
That's right. So if it follows the trend that with Google and others is, because OpenAI has 900 million users, at some point they will gradually blend ads in and they'll make them look, right? They'll construct them in a way that it doesn't seem disruptive to the experience.
Yeah.
Right. But that's the thing they'll have to solve for, right? To make it work.
Yeah, because, so trust is going to be a big thing. People are already talking about that, but the other part that I also think about, which you brought up, and I'm trying to triangulate all the stuff here together right now, is that consumer trust, other retailers feeling, disenfranchised and not wanting this to happen because these other companies have their walled gardens already, and they have the scale to be able to command what they can command. But for everybody else, how do you level the playing field? I think that's going to be the question. So, do you see a world based on what you know today, where are we going to head to a place where personalized shopping through agents becomes a thing? Or is that the way in for these other retailers? Or is it going to be something else? What do you think?
So my instinct is so everybody's going to try, right?
Yeah.
Everybody's going to try this, right? Because in the end, what the consumer wants will drive this, right? So if the consumer wants an agent to do their shopping for them, they will, right? Somebody will build that agent and they will figure out how to do it, right? Now we're assuming it can solve, and they will, I'll put it this way. They'll have to deal with what they can and can't get access to, right? So, right now, if you ask ChatGPT to help you shop, it can't get Amazon reviews, right? It can't scrape Amazon pricing, right? So that's a blind spot. So it'll have to work around all those things.
Yeah.
I think let's imagine a world where, it can help you with research. It can remind you to buy things. Maybe it can go do screen clicking, right, on your behalf and buy things. I think the question that we'll have to solve is, let's say, so the TV one, I think we can kind of agree that if you're buying a $1,500 TV for your living room, you're gonna personally do that transaction, right?
Yeah.
That's a high search good, right? You're going to get some research, but when you get to the end, you're going to go by yourself, personally looking at the models and make that final choice.
Yeah.
Right. But let's take groceries, right? So, hey, like groceries is an example people talk about. Wow, just like fill up my fridge for the week, right? Give me some recipes and fill it up. The challenge is it doesn't know what's in your fridge, right? So it doesn't know you still have a half a loaf of bread because you ate out 2 nights. Right. And let's say your definition of healthy is organic, but somebody else is low fat or they're on a keto diet. Right. So I think the question is, can you get that agent to know you so intimately, right, that it can actually make choices on your behalf and at the level of quality that you're happy with it. Right. So if your grocery order shows up tomorrow and on $100 check, 10% of it is stuff you didn't want. I don't know. I don't know if you're going to do that again, or you're going to say, you know what, I'll just do the groceries myself, right? But if you can get it to 98, where maybe it's almost perfect, okay, now probably you're in a different ballgame.
Well, you brought up a few things here, so let's just kind of unpack. One is context, right, and history of what your past behaviors have been and what's currently available in your fridge. The way the technology has been moving with IoT, you could technically know, you could connect your fridge to your LLM or to your agent rather, to know on a real-time basis what's in your fridge. Technically, that gap which exists today can be closed relatively quickly, in my opinion. Right. Second thing around, let's say if I did eat out, at restaurants, again, keeping trust aside for a moment, technically, based on your credit card usage on a real-time basis, if it's connected to your agent, it knows what your food patterns have been or purchase patterns have been based on restaurants or takeouts or whatever. And could it dynamically then understand exactly what you've done without you having to make the intervention? Is that doable? I would say the answer is actually yes. But when you factor in trust, are you willing to connect your credit card to your agent? Are you willing to connect your fridge? If you can, if you have one of those fridges which has the IoT thing, are you willing to connect it? All those things start coming in as friction points and barriers. But let's assume there's a percentage of the population that's saying, you know what, I'm okay with it. I'm willing to take the risk for it. And then all of a sudden, now you have an entire connected ecosystem through a master agent that knows exactly what your eating patterns have been, and it could then predict what you want next for the following week, possibly. And it could also potentially even predict and say, you know what, Yogesh likes to eat twice a week outside. I'm just going to factor that in, so I'm not going to buy stuff for say 21 meals. I'm going to buy it only for 19 meals.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
So Yeah. So I think this is all theoretically possible, right?
Mhm.
I mean, my instinct is we just named about 6 things that have to be true,
Yes,
right,
agreed,
for this
agreed.
to work.
Yep.
And the task, and so I'll say 2 other things. And we actually have, you can do this with Peapod right now, right? Right. You can do subscribe and save. Like there's a lot of
Hmm.
technologies that already seek to make your people's grocery shopping experience better. And
Hmm.
so I think the question is how much better is a true agentic grocery shopper
Hmm.
um, versus the time savings? And to me, that the fact that 5 or 8 of those things have to be true,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
And like, what's the net benefit? It saves maybe an hour a week of time. I think those are, I'm not sure that that the value equals the payoff or the cost.
I
I mean, just for example, like
Yeah.
people who have the automated lights in their house,
Hmm.
like that sounds really good. I can have the lights come on when I come in, but most people don't do it because the work and
Hmm.
the cost is higher than the benefit.
No, I get that, and I fully agree with you. But I think what's going to happen is that I think whoever is going to be working this problem and trying to solve for this, let's say, right? This is where with AI in general, people talk about efficiencies all the time. We talked about it too, or earlier in our conversation. I think it's going to come down to what is the value that you're actually getting. Time is a time saving of an hour. You can argue and say, yep, it's good, not good, whatever. But
Yeah.
what if we were to say, you know what, if on a annualized basis with inflation the way it's currently going, if AI is able to give you a savings of 10%,
Mhm.
right? Because of it working it versus you doing it by yourself, which would require you to spend more than an hour to go and do all the discovery work
Mhm.
to deliver against your personal budget, right? Then suddenly there's value there, right? So I would stipulate and say that yes, it's theoretical today, but I think one thing we've seen with AI over the last several months or last 3 years is that
Mhm.
things are moving so rapidly.
Mhm.
Today we're talking about this as theory. Who's to say in 6 months' time is actually a reality?
It's possible. Yeah. I think the friction, I see the friction in the business models.
Yeah.
It's certainly possible. And listen, the way this will play out,
Mm.
we've seen this before. This will happen for B2B, right? It's happening now,
Yeah.
right? This will happen for long tail, right?
Yeah.
And then it'll happen within the walled gardens, right? So
Hmm.
Walmart will do this for grocery, right? And they will
Yep.
try to solve all these different pieces. Um, Now the question is, for each of those experiments or each of those tracks, what for each of those friction points,
Hmm.
how much does it cost to deal with a friction point? And then what's the upside, right? And then we will see, right? At the end of a year, how far it's gone in 2 years, right? Um, and that's what's I think great about the moment is none of us know, right?
Exactly.
I'm colored by my experience with Google and retail and
Yeah.
talking to retailers.
Yeah.
Others are more ambitious.
Yeah, no, and look, like you said, there's no right answer, and
Yeah,
I certainly don't prescribe to having
yeah,
predictive capabilities either. Like if I did,
yeah,
I wouldn't be doing podcasts. I would be just lying on a
ah,
beach somewhere, right?
yeah.
But the reality is that I think both of us can agree on is that there is opportunity here if people know how to crack it, and the technology is probably available, but it's still like disaggregated. Someone has to figure out how to bring all these things together and tie it together to be able to offer something that's a higher value add for the end user at the end of the day.
Well, that's right. And you know what you're going to see? You're going to see every year there'll be a round of startups that will try to solve this, right?
Exactly.
And at some
Yeah.
point, maybe one of them strikes gold, right? Or right, maybe Google hits critical mass, right, on MCP and their shopping infrastructure, right? Or maybe Amazon makes a strategic bet and says, no,
Yeah.
we're going to opt in, right? And we're going to be a category leader for agentic shopping, right? That would
Yeah.
turn the playing field, right? So,
Yeah.
um, you know, this is just one of the subsegments that we're going to see AI as a new disruptor.
So let me ask you this: given what you know today, if you were to anticipate where would we be by the end of this calendar year when it comes to agentic commerce? I'm not asking you to predict, just based on the signals that you have available today, what do you anticipate could potentially happen?
I think we'll see a few dimensions. So one is in terms of traffic from ChatGPT to retail.
Yeah.
I think it will be a growing but still insignificant share, right? Which is currently immaterial. It will continue to grow at huge rates, but remain, just because it's so small, a rounding error.
Yeah.
That said, I think retailers, it will be a third channel that you need to start really accounting for. So first it was stores, online, right? And then as source, you had Google search, and now social, and then now it will be chatbots.
Yeah.
So that will be for real. I think we'll see progress in B2B, right? We'll see progress within the walled gardens, right? And then I think we will see various folks opting into Google's sort of ecosystem, especially on the long tail, right? And I think we'll see meaningful progress there, right?
And is there anything you anticipate that will die a certain death, if you were to call it that?
I'm super skeptical of people trying to build a retail experience within ChatGPT or chatbots.
Okay.
My opinion is both in terms of the provider side, right? If I'm Walmart or Target, et cetera, do I want to spend money building a half-assed version of my site that lives inside a chatbot, or do I want to find a way to get you off of there onto my prem? Right. And then similarly, if I'm OpenAI, how much do I want to spend money on trying to build a bunch of plugins for someone to have a half-baked experience within mine versus just sending you over? Right. So my instinct is the sort of the experience within the chatbot will struggle.
Are you seeing anybody actually redefine what the experience should be versus trying to replicate the experience from what's online or in store?
Well, I think the upside is how do I make that handoff really seamless, right? So I'm having a conversation with ChatGPT, right? How do I, once you do it right, you say, okay, now send me over to Walmart and don't start over from scratch, right? It's like the old IVR, right? When you push the 7 buttons, answer all the questions, and then you show up, you get the person on the other line, and they're like, who are you again, right? And you have to give them the same information you typed into the IVR.
Yeah.
I think that's a real advantage. I have not looked closely to see if someone has done that yet. Yogesh, you may know, right? But to me, that handoff, I think, is a real opportunity.
No, I agree with you. I have not seen anything either just yet. So that's why I was wondering if you had seen something as well, because, I think part of what I sense in general, not just about, service and experiences, this is happening across, I think, every industry, is that we're seeing AI, almost trying to replicate what we were doing, how we were doing things in the past.
That's right.
Right. And, what I'm kind of saying is that what if you let go of those past paradigms and create new paradigms of how things could look like with AI being at the center of everything, right? And then what would that look like? What would an AI-driven experience actually look like without doing the way you did it in the past?
That's right. I think this is the thing. And I think, the thing that colors all this, that over and over happens when I talk to folks, one is we're used to business leaders in Fortune 500 especially, we're making ROI decisions, right? Which is, okay, here's my strategic plan for the next year. And here's what I'm going to do based on what I know will have an ROI.
Yeah.
We're not used to strategic planning saying, oh, let me imagine a future that's different, right? That's not a path that is core to the DNA of Fortune 500 leaders. And so that is breaking a lot of, or causing us to try to think through these things differently. And then the challenge on top of this is that the underlying tech is getting better every month, right? Agentic coding was not a thing 6 months ago, right?
No, it wasn't. Yeah.
But programming is completely turned upside down in 6 months.
Yes.
Maybe 3 months, right? And so, the discussion we had about the grocery scenario, right? I mean, what if the technology takes leaps and bounds in a year, right? And suddenly it can do all these things with no errors,
Mm-hmm.
right? Then we're having an entirely different conversation, right? And so that's the compounding on all of this is how to make decisions that are decisions I haven't made before, and on a technology base that is still getting better.
Yeah, and therein lies the rub, right? Because I think, if, in my opinion, it's one thing to invest into AI, and so we need to run with this. We were talking about this earlier in the call, but it's the paradigm shift that has to happen. And I think the more companies start thinking about those new paradigms and actually being creative and saying, how do we create the new paradigm? Because actually that's a business opportunity. It's not just an AI opportunity. Because if you are able to recreate and reframe the paradigm, you've now actually unlocked potential for new customers, right? That can actually give you a competitive advantage against all your competitors in your industry, right? So if you're a CMO or a CEO thinking about these questions, I would be saying to you, lean into the new paradigms. What are they? Who are you talking to? Who are you engaging with that's helping you think outside the box, so to speak? Right? I know it sounds so cliche, but this is the time to be thinking outside the box more than ever, in my opinion.
So, by the way, I'm 100% tracking you, Yogesh.
Yeah.
And I teach a class on AI and strategy.
Yeah.
And one of the fundamental theses is 3 years from now, everyone will be using all these tools, right? Everyone will have a customer service chatbot. Everyone will be automating purchasing and HR through with AI.
Mm.
So the question isn't, so if all you're doing is just adopting all the things,
yeah,
you're not getting a competitive advantage. You're just doing what everybody else is doing. And so
100%.
what are you going to do different that enhances your competitive advantage and defensively, right? Make sure you don't get disrupted by others. And I think that's what people need to be thinking about.
Mm-hmm.
Agentic shopping, or even out any industry, right?
Yes, agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. And I just feel like that's the bigger opportunity that people are missing right now. And I look at like the market research industry. That's where you and I met. The conference.
Yeah.
Think about how many companies were talking about, and again, I'm not trying to disparage anybody, but like AI moderated interviews, right? 6 months ago, we heard about it the first time. Today, everyone's talking about it. Everyone's offering a version of that. I'm sitting there thinking, okay, now what? That's just repeating what we were doing in the past. Is there a different way to do this? Has anybody thought about that? What is that different way? Have you experimented with that?
That's right.
I'm not seeing that yet,
That's right. So where I go with this, Yogesh, is I mentioned the bottlenecks before, right?
Yeah.
So in a world, and this builds on your point, in a world where I can use AI to generate 1,000 different product ideas, right, in a day or even half a day, right? My competitor can do that as well, right? And so anybody can get access to those 1,000 ideas that a chatbot can build. So how do I get uniquely different ideas, right? And then how do I choose the best ones at the bottleneck, both of prototyping and then which ones do I actually want to bring to market, right? So how do I, in a world where some things become unlimited goods, right? How do I choose the best ones and then win at the bottleneck? I think it's a fascinating question.
I think so too. And in fact, somebody just actually dropped a comment. I'm going to show you the comment here. Raj is saying AI doesn't just make research faster, it collapses the advantage of having more research and advantage to acting on insight faster than competitors. The sooner Fortune 500 companies realize this, the faster they can adapt and stay relevant. I think there's a lot of truth to that, actually. What do you think?
Well, I'll tell you, Yogesh, this is something, I learned this in retail. Agility is, so we would work with, two archetypes. I'd work with one retailer who could test a new Google solution, or Meta, anyone could test a new ad solution or approach, but it would take them 3 months to run a test, right? Because they had to get approvals and put it in the market, all the things. And then I had others who could do it in 6 weeks, right? And so at the end of a year, the one who could do it in 6 weeks had tested twice as many things, right? And in 5 years, they tested 20 more things than the one who was slow.
Yeah.
And so that agility was it would compound. It's like, hey, everyone, you get 1% better. And by the end, you're dramatically ahead of your competition.
Yeah.
And that's a long, I'm coming around, but to Raj's point, there's so many new ideas right now in AI that the ability to test them and say, okay, I'm going to run a quick pilot and see if this is viable for my business, but execute that with agility, because the opportunity cost is actually my organizational opportunity cost, right?
Yeah,
it's how much time do I have to act, to test, and implement. So anyway, I love the point. Yeah.
Amazing. So, hey, I know you talked about something on your LinkedIn page. I'm going to just touch on it for a bit.
Yeah.
You made a comment about Mythos and the Project Glasswing, right? Let's start with what's all that about this Mythos and Project Glasswing, and what was your point of view on that? I'm just curious to, if you could just level set everybody and then tell us what your point of view was on that.
Well, I'll tell you, Yogesh. So it's fascinating. So I don't know if they pronounce it Mythos or Mythos. I've heard it both ways, but it's the latest Anthropic model. And it was so powerful, right, that in internal testing, they found thousands of bugs, right, in software we've used for years. So there's this one called OpenBSD that's considered basically bulletproof, and they found a 27-year-old bug in this thing, right? And so Anthropic said, we will not release Mythos to the public because it would lead to a rash of security breaches, right? So they handpicked, say, I think 40 companies, including Google, but also CrowdStrike, Cisco, Google's a competitor, right? To say, hey, we're going to work with you to fix all the bugs before we release it. So, I mean, I think credit to them, right, for doing this. I think there's a lot of ways to think about this. Two that I think are most important is one, the AI, there's a lot of doomerism in AI, right? It's going to take all our jobs. It's going to, it's going to kill all humanity, right? Like all the things. This is potentially the first one, right? Which is, let's say this technology becomes available and we see a rash of ransomware attacks across all of our systems. Your local hospital, right? The water filtration plant, all the local retailers, and suddenly our gas pipeline. Suddenly our economy is brought to its knees by these. This is the first potential, actually real negative effect from AI. The other way, though, just is super practical, is if you're running a business, you're used to your CISO crying wolf, right? They're like the mechanic. You go on the mechanic and they're like, hey, 8 things, you really got to fix all these things. And so you're used to tuning them out, right? You say, okay, well, I'll give you this much, do what you want. I think it's a time to take those folks seriously, right? And say, we want to be ready for when these models hit the market, that we don't get hit by the ransomware attack.
I hear you. And, like you said, kudos to Anthropic for, being extra, judicious in terms of what they've done. We don't know who the next player is who can replicate this, right? Because if they can do it, somebody else can do it too. Let's be honest with each other, right? The next player may not be as, forthcoming. So to your point, I think we have to think about how we prepare for this. But the question is, how do you do it? Because you don't know where the bugs are.
Well, that's right. You're exactly right. So in the long game, it's going to be AI versus AI, right? So you're going to use AI for defense. You're going to say, find all my gaps and vulnerabilities and patch them all, right? And you're going to hope that that's good, that defense works as well as the offense. In the near term, I mean, there are guides for this, right? So you got to audit your vendors, right? You should patch all your software, right? You should you're better off in a cloud vendor than you are with your own, right? So there's a playbook here. But people should be using AI as part of it, right? To do my own audits. And I think that the funny thing, Yogesh, I've had a few people ask about this. The number one thing you need to do is have someone in the security, leading your security, who's you trust, right? Because even if you take it fully seriously, you're still going to have him make decisions about what do you do first and when. And so you need someone to be making really solid decisions, right? And so that comes sort of back to humans, right? Having a human you trust in that capacity.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, in a way, what you've actually said is that if you have a chief AI officer in the company, it's not just about deployment and adoption, it's also about defense and security. It has to be part of their remit.
That's right. And for them, it's probably working with the CISO. So the chief AI officer and the CISO, they want to be hand in glove.
Yeah.
And the funny thing, like, this feels like Y2K, right?
Yeah.
It absolutely feels like Y2K, right?
It does.
And there's a world where, Y2K was a yawn, right? Remember? It was like, oh, we had a couple of ATMs that didn't work and maybe some printouts were wrong.
Yeah.
And goodness, we hope that what this turns into, right, is that
Yeah.
between A, maybe the hackers aren't as good as we think, and B, we put a lot of work into it right now to be prepared. The hope is that this is a nothing burger, and we can go back to Anthropic and say, yeah, you guys were trying to scare us, but it was not real. I mean, God love us. We hope that's the case, right?
We do hope that's the case. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, listen, Matt, I don't know if you realize, but we're already at the top of the hour.
Oh, wow.
It's gone so fast. First of all, thank you so much for making the time and, sharing your thoughts and wisdom with me today. I truly appreciate that. But more importantly, I'd love to have you come back next year. So we'll give ourselves a year.
Okay.
Right? And I would love to have you back on if you're open to it. And we can have a conversation to see, based on today's conversation, where are we today?
I'd love to. Yeah. I mean, I'm a massive fan of yours, Yogesh. So it's always a pleasure. And I won't, well, it won't even be a year, but we can talk about how Yogi AI is playing out too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you again. And thanks everybody for listening in. We have a couple more shows coming up in the next few weeks. I have Sumit Agarwal from Ario, who will be coming in and talking with us. And then Anna Juneja, who couldn't make it a couple of weeks ago for some personal reasons, but she's committed to coming on and talking with me from a legal perspective. So that's going to be an interesting one. She's a lawyer who deals with AI. She's actually, sued and got countersued by OpenAI. So she's been dealing with that. I don't know if she'll be able to talk about that, of course, because it's an ongoing thing for her. But she's in the middle of all these things, and I'm really hoping that I can get some time from her to come and talk with us as well. So stay tuned. There's a lot coming this year. Thanks, everyone, and have a great rest of the day. Thank you again.
Thanks, Yogesh. Cheers.